Are you a high-performing real estate investor who's looking to further elevate your performance? If so, download our free guide, Raising the Bar, 5 Steps to Elevate Your Habits, by joining our insider network at elevatepod.com. This guide, created by yours truly, has the power to put your transformation on autopilot and exponentially change your trajectory. Go get your free copy now at elevatepod.com.
Welcome to Elevate, the masterclass where we dissect the elements of exceptional achievement and lifestyle design with a focus on personal growth and real estate investing. Now, here's your host, Tyler Chesser.
Elevate Nation, welcome back. This is Tyler Chesser. I'm so thankful to have you here, and I am blessed and grateful to be sitting with Loe Hornbuckle today, who is a phenomenal developer, investor, and purpose-driven individual. And you're going to learn so much today about how being a Renaissance man and really being curious and integrating learnings and multidisciplinary learning into your real estate business can impact not only your impact, but it can also impact your bottom line in so many different capacities. And it really can make life worth living. It can make business worth struggling through, right? Because it's not always easy, right? It's not always totally smooth and simple to do big things, whether it's in real estate or otherwise. But I think you're going to get a lot of that firepower from today's episode. I want to encourage you to really buckle up because today's episode is phenomenal. And Elevate Podcast is all about mindset, mind expansion, and personal growth for high-performing real estate investors. I'm your host, Tyler Chesser, and I'm a professional real estate investor and high-performance coach. It is my job to decode the stories, habits, and multifaceted expertise of world-class investors and other experts to help you elevate your performance and lifestyle. Are you ready to take it to another level? It is time. Let's raise the bar. And before we dive into this episode, I want to ask you, if you haven't done so already, give us a rating, a review, and subscribe and follow Elevate Podcast wherever it is that you listen or watch podcasts. And, it obviously helps us as we continue to bring massive value. Beyond that, we'd love to ask you to pay the fee, which is really just to share this with someone that you care about, someone that you maybe have just met, someone that you've known for a long time, maybe someone that you'd like to reconnect with. Share this episode, share this podcast with someone that you care about. That's the fee. If you've already done that one time, thank you so much. We just ask you that you do that one more time. You share this with someone that you care about. If you feel so inclined, share this on social media, share this with your network and tell them, what are your takeaways? Or, you know what, I really love this podcast because, one of the things that's so important is that the word because is one of the most influential words in the English language. And the reason why is because people need reasons to understand and to take certain actions. And we can be more influential when we give people reasons why. And it's not because I said so, it's because this was impactful because, right? And there's so many different ways where we can really apply that in our life, in our business, and in the way that we impact other people. So I just want to encourage you to share this and let's dive in. I want to introduce you to Loe Hornbuckle of Dallas, Texas, who is the CEO and founder of Sage Oak Assisted Living and Memory Care. Founded in 2015, Sage Oak isn't just another assisted living company. Sage Oak is the boutique assisted living company with 5 locations in Dallas and a total of 40 beds. Sage Oak provides small, intimate home settings that allow those who need a little extra care to receive the love and dignity that they deserve. Sage Oak also has 2 ground-up boutique assisted living / memory care developments in Texas and Louisiana, totaling just under 300 beds with an estimated dollar value of $45 million. For more about operations related to boutique senior housing, visit thesageoak.com. And of course, he also co-founded Good Horn Capital, a private equity firm focused on recession-resistant assets like multifamily and build-to-rent developments. For more about investing, go to goodhorncapital.com. So you're going to learn a lot about Loe Hornbuckle today, the man, the leader, the individual behind this purpose and behind this big vision. And I want you to take a look about how can you integrate some of his characteristics into your own approach? How can you integrate some of the learnings, some of the insights into your own leadership approach and how you integrate with other people? So this is an opportunity for you to become that next version of yourself. So without further ado, enjoy this phenomenal conversation with Loe Hornbuckle. Loe Hornbuckle, my man, how you doing?
Tyler, how are you doing, sir? I'm doing great myself.
Well, there you go. I like that. I was wondering if you were going to tell me how you're doing, but I am doing well, and I'm excited because every time I hang out with you, it's not enough, but every time I hang out with you, I laugh, and I think that's important. But what do you think about that?
I think I'm moderately funny, but I think I'm very funny compared to the average engineer in our business. So I think it's just one of those situations where, like, if you're on a flight and the flight attendant's relatively attractive, she's way more attractive because the options are lower. So I think that my funny is just relative to the type of people we hang out with.
There you go. There you go. No, you're being very, self-deprecating in that, because I think you're not giving yourself enough credit, which I think is a great thing. But man, I tell you what, the first time I met you had me rolling, and I just think there's so much power in humor, because what we do a lot of times in real estate and even just building businesses and, being a leader of other people and having a big vision in life is very challenging. And sometimes you just lose sight of some of the finer things, which to me, laughter is a beautiful thing. But does that resonate with you?
Yeah, totally. And I think the first time we met, I just come off stage and there's a decompression period for me. And yes, when I come off stage, I am a wild person. So, and I wasn't even, everyone else was having a cocktail or two and I didn't have any. So I was just coming off the stage like a crazy person. So I'm glad that moment in time is frozen for you, because I'm not normally always like that. I'm often really quiet. People don't realize that. I either have two speeds, on or off. And when I'm on, it's the Loe show has begun. And when I'm off, it's you wouldn't even know that I was there.
Yeah, I think that decompression thing is really interesting. I can resonate with that as well, because I can be hyper focused and I'm all in on something. But when we have accomplished the goal, it's like, man, I have to totally decompress, and like you couldn't get me to accomplish anything for a period of time. So I think there's a lot to be said about that. And we all have a dynamic personality, and it's not just one gear, right? We shift down, we shift up. And I think every listener has that part of that dynamic personality, and whatever sense that is, it could be totally different than the way yours or my personality is. But I think it's important to understand that, because it's a long journey, right? But as we dive into this conversation, Loe, if you were to describe yourself in the way that your closest friends or family members who know you best, what would they say about Loe Hornbuckle?
I was reading your notes for the show, and that's a damn fine question, I must say. So sorry for the cursing. It's just going to come out naturally. I'm going to take the Gary V approach to this thing. But, ultimately, I thought about that. I don't really know. I think they would say that I'm a loyal friend, that that I do have multitudes of my personality. I'm into a lot of strange hobbies. So I play poker semi-professionally. I shoot firearms long range, like 1,000 to 1,500 yards. So I'm kind of this odd Renaissance man, but only in so much as I can't fix anything. I can't build anything. I have no useful skills other than poker and shooting guns and maybe telling a few jokes. But I don't know. It's a great question. I feel like now I think the value of this show for me is I'm going to go ask my friends what they would say about me, so that in case anyone ever asks this question, or on the rare chance that I'm one of your only repeat guests, many, many years down the road, I'll have a much more sophisticated answer laid out for you.
So we got the growth is really happening in front of our eyes, right? Because now this is causing you to have some more introspection in terms of, well, how would people describe me, right? And it's almost like taking ourselves out of our own shoes to say, well, what is my impact on other people? And what am I really rubbing off on other people? So I think it's a valuable question for all of us to ask.
Sure.
How would the closest friends and family members of any of the listeners, how would they describe you? And so I think that question, man, I love it too, because it allows us to really step out of ourselves and gain that perspective. But you mentioned Renaissance man. What exactly do you mean by that?
I just have a lot of varied interests. Obviously I think that term came about when there was a lot of different disciplines sort of happening simultaneously. And so for me, I have a lot of, obviously there's not a lot of people that are into, most people have very particular hobbies, and mine are just kind of sporadic and just things that I kind of get into. Like most people, when they hear like long range shooting, I don't necessarily like it for the adrenaline rush. I actually like it because it's relaxing, because when you're shooting long range, it's more about breathing. It's about controlling your body. It's about, you're not shooting very fast in many cases. And so it's more about precision. It's more about, thinking through a problem, right? You've got gravity's constant, but the wind's not, and other environmental impacts change it. So when you're shooting really far, you've got to consider barometric pressure. You've got to consider which hemisphere are you in. There's a lot that goes to it, and so it's really kind of a fun math problem that then only gets executed when you breathe properly and control your body and pull the trigger appropriately, as an example, right? So that's a hobby that's not super common, right? So, so I think it's just because I'm interested in a lot of different stuff. I'm sort of the type of person that would be prone to reading a book about self-improvement. And I'd also read like a Stephen Hawking book and then Google every other word about black holes. So I just I have a lot of different interests. The whole world is a very curious place to me. And I feel like, a lot of people, we get so focused in our niches or our silos that we don't ask broader questions. And I just enjoy learning about lots of different stuff. So that's probably why I felt that way.
Man, that resonates with me very deeply. And that's one of the things that I love about doing the podcast as an example is I get to scratch that curiosity itch so deeply. And it's like, I want to know. And the more I've become I've gained awareness in terms of my own deep sense of curiosity, the more my life has gained depth and color and excitement. And I'm sure that's the case for you. And you talk about even just hobbies and learning how you can apply certain curiosities or learnings in terms of not only your biology, in terms of your breathing, but also what's happening in your environment, and also, the mechanics and perhaps even the mathematics of long range shooting. I think that's really, really interesting. But when did you discover that curiosity? I mean, when did you discover sort of that was your baseline and really something that really kind of continued to open your eyes?
Well, I mean, I definitely as a child, I think if you had asked me that question about how people would describe me as a child, I probably would have used the word precocious. I was an only child. And so I had to sort of let's just say family vacations weren't very fun because I would just be me and my parents and they were on vacations. They wanted to relax. And when you're a kid, you want to do stuff. Right. So, I had to read a lot. I had to, go outside and explore and, sort of test boundaries and things like that. So, as a kid, I was always in trouble. I was always into something because I was exploring. And I wouldn't say I was bad, but I definitely wasn't good. So I was somewhere on the spectrum of being a bad kid. I did some bad things. I did some really great things, but I learned a lot. And I think I just sort of kept that. I never really grew up from a curiosity point of view. When you're a kid, there's all these things you do that as an adult maybe aren't socially acceptable. And I think there's a lot of people that make the argument that as kids we kind of had it figured out, and that as adults we lose an element of that. And I certainly would agree with that perspective. But from a curiosity standpoint, I'm as curious now as I ever have been.
Yeah. And I think that we all need to be more like kids in terms of our curiosity, but kind of going back to the rebelliousness of what you just described, it's almost like you were exploring those boundaries, right? You were exploring the edges of what would be acceptable, what's not acceptable in society. And it almost seems like in some ways you're doing that professionally now, like you're continuing to push the bounds in terms of what really is, the baseline of, hey, what's possible, right? And being a developer, obviously, I would imagine you're continuing to question conventional wisdom, continuing to question, what's been done before and create something new as a result of that curiosity. Am I understanding that or making the correct assumption there?
No, fundamentally, I think some of the work that we do, some of the work we do at our company is incredibly easy. But a big chunk of what we do is incredibly hard. And, operating in assisted living and memory care, very difficult. Developing, especially in a difficult supply chain environment like we have now, very difficult. But I would say I'm not a religious man, but the closest thing I can come to a spiritual experience is when you visit a field, just a field for 3 years, and then one day it becomes something else, and it becomes something that people are going to experience joy, happiness. They're going to eat there, they're going to live there, they're going to go through visit families, and then often go through end of life in this place. And to just create something from nothing, or at least create the field was nothing. Obviously took a lot of raw materials. It didn't come from nothing, but that's a really, that I didn't really have that experience. And I've only recently started to call myself a developer because I'm like the least handy developer ever. So I can't do anything. So it feels really insane. Like, when I'm talking to people, I'm like, oh, okay, you're a builder. I'm like, no, I hire those. I can't build anything. So it's really cool because, development really is about bringing people together, and it's about creating a symphony, right? So you've got all these different instruments that have to sort of work in conjunction. And so it's been really fun to be in situations where maybe there's a interpersonal matter between, two of the members of the team, like maybe there's a couple project managers and they're squabbling, and like you have to sit them down. Like maybe they don't even work for me. And I'm like, all right, let me just coach, train, and lead. Right. So there's just a lot of really, really cool stuff that comes from that. We've overcome a lot of adversity for some of the projects that we've done. So you definitely get a real sense of, I would say, self-worth, but also self-confidence when you can just, that old saying, everyone's got a plan until you get punched.
Mm-hmm.
As a developer of assisted living and memory care, you're going to get punched, sometimes literally, and especially in the case of dementia clients. And so, you just have to draw from the experience of going, hey, I've done this before. I know how to do this. I'll overcome this as well. Because I think a lot of people avoid things like development because they see it as so challenging and they see it as so difficult. They sell themselves short. They aren't willing to put themselves in a position to push the needle. And, I really have no business being an innovator in assisted living and memory care, except for the fact that I have no business being an innovator, because innovation never comes from the inside. Because if you're on the inside, you often can't see the forest for the trees. And so, most innovators don't come from the industry they change. And so you have to come from a different perspective. You have to ask the questions that are somewhat dogmatic, right? Meaning that, we've always done things this way. Well, why have you always done them this way? What if there was a better way? And that's a question that a lot of people don't ask when they're in the industry. It gets beaten out of them. And so, yeah, I definitely think that development really is a problem solving exercise. It's definitely no different than long range shooting or working on a Rubik's Cube or playing a game of chess or playing poker. It's a problem solving exercise. It's a leadership exercise. So, that's why I think I get a lot of satisfaction from that. I don't have that same experience when I buy some existing thing and change the occupancy. And that's not to say that other folks don't have that experience, because some do. It just doesn't make me feel that way. I enjoy the building of things as opposed to the building of a team, the building of a building, as opposed to, just taking something over that someone else did.
There's so much value in what you just described there. And I know that, at least from what I understand, your background, at least in real estate, started in terms of, all right, well, acquiring existing asset, improving the operations of that asset, and, enjoying the financial benefits of that. And you didn't feel that sort of purpose driven outcome that you do now feel in terms of being a developer, being in assisted living and so forth, and really adding that sort of impact to other people. But I think what you shared there, before I kind of lead back into a question in that part of the conversation, I think it's so important what you just shared in terms of being a coach, a trainer, a leader, and really being that sort of conductor of the symphony, right? And understanding what all the instruments need to be playing and getting them to play a similar tune that leads into a melody, I think is so powerful. And that's a visualization that we can all understand and apply in whatever capacity that we feel is going to bring impact to what is our purpose, right? And then going back to the baseline and like the undercurrent of all this is your level of curiosity, your level of questioning assumptions, using the beginner's mind and questioning the dogma, right? I love how you said the dogmatic assumptions, because there are a lot of things where people say, whether it's in development or in real estate or across many businesses, it's like, look, this is the way it's done. This is the way you do it. And here's the checklist and go for it. And man, there's so much value in this undercurrent. So that's why I like to have these type of conversations, because to me, this is almost more powerful than saying, hey, what's your system? What's your process? Because guess what? It might be different. It might be more appropriate for you to change that process based on what market you're in or what outcome you're truly serving. But I don't know if that resonates with you, Loe.
Yeah, well, I think for me, it was funny. We had dinner the night with another team. We were just kind of discussing collaborative opportunities, and our team, we have a couple of similar personalities on our team at Goodhorn, and we're just really comfortable being uncomfortable, meaning that we're totally okay with not knowing something. We're currently developing a build to sell subdivision, and we've never done a build to sell subdivision. In fact, a lot of our career has been sort of build to rent and sort of mocking the risk profile of build to sell. And now we're doing it, and we literally have no idea what we're doing. The first time I've ever pitched a planning and zoning committee was this project. It's going to be the first time I go in front of a city council. And my partners are very similar. And we were kind of having a conversation with the other team, and I see them as, they're a brilliant team, but they're very much focused on, building checklists and systems and processes. And look, they're a much bigger company than us. So this is not a critique of, it's just, we know ourselves. And I think people that are systematic and process driven, they have to know that about themselves, and other people are just okay with, hey, you know what, drop me up in Antarctica and I'll figure out a way to get back. And I think that's kind of the game for us, because the moment it becomes so systematic and so process driven, it kind of can take the fun out of it. I mean, you can really think about all the situations in which when something becomes systematic, it can lose some of its enjoyment, right? And so I think that's one of the reasons why we often, if you think about how much in culture we like revere sports figures, it's because both sides are working incredibly hard, and they're training and they're practicing. But then when a game happens, it's dynamic. There's things happening, and there's just things you can't really prepare for, because the opponent anticipated your move and you anticipate their move. And it's a question like, how far along on levels are you? And, I think the reason why we do that is because there's these moments where we just see art when someone, he should not be diving for the end zone there, and he dives for the end zone, or she should not be trying to hit the second serve as fast as she's going to. And when we see those things, we understand that's when someone's sort of breaking free of process and system and sort of moving into the art phase. And so I think there's a lot of that in business. There's a lot of opportunities to do artful things. There's a lot of opportunities that when you're sitting with a client or talking to an investor, and you just sort of go off script or you go off reservation, and you just do it because it feels natural and it feels like the right thing to do in the moment. And if you trust your judgment and you trust yourself in those situations, you can have some really cool stuff, or you can just ask them a series of predetermined questions and never explore or dive deep. And so I've always just enjoyed the part where I go off reservation. I like to prepare, I like to think through things, I like to have a plan, but my plan is generally basic, and instead to just feel my way through whatever situation or whatever moment we're in. And that can be scary for a lot of people. And so I don't think it's the right thing for a lot of people, but it's the right thing for us. And that's what we get a lot of pleasure out of.
And I think it becomes appropriate when you reach a certain level of experience, right? And, if you're brand new in a certain endeavor, of course, it's probably best to follow best practices and to iterate when it becomes appropriate, when you gain a certain level of expertise. And that's why I think it's important for us to be having this conversation, because we're talking to high performing real estate investors. It's not about necessarily sticking to the framework, but it's about letting your genius come through. If you're serving someone else, it's beautiful what happens when you speak from the heart, or you speak from your gut, or you really truly listen to them and act dynamically in how you're serving those other people. One of the things that I think is really cool about you, and that really strikes me about you, is that you're very purpose driven. So talk to me about that, because the reason why I bring that up is this past weekend, I spent the weekend with a man named Rich Deviney, a Navy SEAL commander for 20 plus years. And he is an amazing individual. And he was a previous guest on Elevate. And he actually works with Simon Sinek, who wrote the book, Start With Why. And when Simon Sinek wrote that book, if you think about that phrase, start with why, of course, it makes a lot of sense. But there's a huge shift in terms of your real impact and, the real income that your properties, your businesses can create. And it's a total transformation in terms of not only your integration with the marketplace, but also your company and the people that you impact internally as well. So talk to me a little bit about how purpose drives you forward and what that really means to you, and really what your purpose is.
See, I don't necessarily see myself as distinctly purpose driven. I think the reason why sometimes people have that perception is because the difference between some of what I do and what I think a lot of your other guests do is they come on and they talk about the thing that's the vehicle to get them to their why, because their why is personal. It's lifestyle, it's family, it's, there's something that they want, and they see real estate as a vehicle or their business as a vehicle. I've just married the purpose to the same thing. And so, our business is about improving outcomes in assisted living and memory care. It's about innovating in those areas. And one of the reasons why I think to that point, my dad had a really bad experience when he was on hospice. And so it became very easy for me to be like, okay, I'm willing to push the needle and try to help these people, help our clients and help our families through a difficult time. And so I think it's, I wouldn't say that I'm more purpose driven. I think I've just managed to marry the vehicle and the why together, right? So for some people, they're passionate about housing people, or they're passionate about storing their things, right? But it's a little bit harder sometimes to be like, hey, I'm storing grandma's couch and that's my why. Like, that's a different situation, right? So maybe you're a minimalist and you're excited about helping people pare down their homes and things like that. So for I think the reason why I may come across that way is not because I'm uniquely purpose driven, because I think a lot of people are purpose driven, probably some more than me. I'm pretty pragmatic about most things. However, I've paired the vehicle and the business to my purpose, which is that I want to help other people, because I've made money before where I didn't feel like I was really helping other people. And I never feel the same as when I make money and have success when helping someone is the outcome. And so I think that's really the reason why I've just really tried to carve out this space where I'm not just investing for, income or return. I'm investing for a purpose. And so I think that's maybe the reason why. So with respect to your question, I appreciate it. I just think it's maybe confusing because a lot of people have, their purpose is separate, and the thing that they're talking about on the show is just their vehicle. And I've just combined the two, I guess, would be the answer.
Hey guys, just a quick word from our sponsor and we'll be right back to the show. This episode of Elevate is brought to you by CF Capital. And you know how much I love real estate and how it can be a vehicle towards creating any outcome that you want in your life, which is really why we created CF Capital. It's a real estate investment firm that focuses on acquiring and operating multifamily assets that provide stable cash flow, capital appreciation, and a margin of safety for our investors, for our partners, and for the people that we serve. Our team leverages its expertise in acquisitions and management to provide investors like you with superior risk-adjusted returns while placing a premium on preserving capital. Our mission is to provide property investment and asset management solutions to help investors maximize their returns by investing in high-value multifamily communities. Our philosophy is that we can elevate communities together through this process. And I want to invite you to go check out cfcapllc.com because we have a free ebook that's called The Bottom Line, the 10 ways to increase cash flow in an apartment complex. And I want to tell you that this is a value-packed ebook. So I want to invite you to go check that out right now at cfcapllc.com. I think you're going to get a ton of value just from reading this, whether you apply it to your own business or whether you educate yourself further on what it would look like if you invested with CF Capital. So go check that out at cfcapllc.com. Again, that's cfcapllc.com. And enjoy the rest of the show.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great response, and it's a great thought process. And you think about the feeling, right? The feeling of, making an impact. And I do think about, your experience with your dad. And obviously in the moment, I'm sure that was a tremendously, terrible experience, not only for yourself, but for the rest of your family. And that's led you to find this purpose that's allowed you to marry sort of the vehicle of your business with really, doing what's right for other people. And so you've obviously used that now as more and more fuel to continue to push through challenges, to continue to be innovative, to continue to question assumptions. Am I assuming that correctly, Loe?
Yeah, no, I think you have that correct. I mean, I think, I judge people versus their potential. We always have these people in our lives that are, just like their potential we think is one thing and they're just crushing it. And we have other people that have this massive ceiling and they just never can get out of their own way, or they have something going on where they can't get started. And so, I don't know that I'm ever going to have kids. So far, I'm undefeated on that front. So, I'm 39. So for me, if I want to make an impact on the world, then what I've got to do is I've got to impact people while I'm here, and I have to build something that maybe can help people after I'm gone. And so, for me, that means, and there's that. And the thing about what I do, and I know it's interesting because people in the apartment business call themselves multifamily. I want to take that back, because if you really think about it, when you're taking care of a grandmother, there's actually a couple of families behind that person you're taking care of, right? Sometimes more than two families. And so the real multifamily is assisted living and memory care, because you're actually impacting not only your tenant or your resident in that case, but also, the power of attorney and the brother-in-law that's handling the finances and all these people that come and visit, right? Because it's a sort of communal thing. So, even if in my lifetime I only care for 10,000 people in those settings, then, that's a multiplier effect because I've had an impact on 2x, 3x, 10x, 20x in some cases in big families of those people. So, that's the way I have to look at it because, ultimately it's hard to open facilities and hard to do those things. And, I think my leadership style sort of lends itself to being a medium-sized company, having enough scaling where I can protect myself from my own weaknesses, but not being so big that, as an example, I had some nurses, and they're in long-term care and they were vaccine hesitant, regardless of your opinion about vaccines, because obviously they're unusually controversial. You would probably argue that if you're a medical professional and you're taking care of the most vulnerable, that, it might be wise to take the vaccine to protect your residents or protect your other team members so that you don't get sick and have to go out of work for a long time and prove strain on the team. So, I was able to sit down with them and address their concerns. If I had 5,000 nurses under my employ, I probably couldn't do that. And that's why you see the big hospital systems are like, hey, we're going to mandate this because they don't have the ability to sit down with people and have a conversation on a human level to try to lead and persuade. And fortunately, I was able to convince the vaccine hesitant folks that it was wise to do, and they got jabs in the arm. And again, regardless of your opinion, I want to be an effective leader, and my ability to lead effectively is not writing policy. It's to touch the heart of the person across the table from me. And only then can I lead. And so, that's just an example of why I just don't think I'm sort of cut out to be have a 10,000 bed assisted living portfolio. I'm a 1,000 bed to 2,000 bed guy, because at least I can still know key members of management, and I can still know, residents of high reputation, whether that be because they have a certain quirk about them that makes them sort of stand out from the resident population, or because I've helped with their family in some way. I don't think it's possible for me to know 2,000 residents and their families. I don't think that's realistic, but I still get a chance to have that connection to the mission, and I still get a chance to lead the people that do the work every day.
Yeah, that goes back to the beginning of our conversation in terms of awareness and knowing yourself, knowing your leadership style, and knowing that and being so clear on your vision. Now you can say, well, I'm not a 10,000 bed guy. I'm a 1,000 or 2,000 bed, because that aligns with my mission, that aligns with my impact, that aligns with my leadership style. And I think that is so valuable. It's so enlightening. And when you think about your leadership style, like, how else would you describe it? I mean, what else has really set you apart in terms of how you lead others?
Well, I think, it's interesting. I think it's evolved over time. I think that, when I was first a leader, I got into leadership at a very young age. I mean, obviously, I had a team at the car dealership I was working at when I was about 20. And then, when I was 24, I was managing managers. And, I think when you're insecure as a leader, which is pretty common for I don't know a lot of 24-year-old guys that are real secure in themselves. We put on airs, right? We create a lot of problems that way. But I think now, because it's funny. So to unwrap that a little bit, I think I read a lot about aging just because of the line of work I'm in. And America is a very ageist society. And we do a lot of things that's very subtle. But I think the thing we've kind of gotten away from is that with age means that you should know yourself better. And so one of the things that I think is true is that, a lot of the best leaders are generally a little older because they have that wisdom and they know themselves. And so I really try to approach, leadership first off from a self-awareness point of view, because if I'm not the right person to deliver the message and there's someone better to do that, that's the first thing. So many leaders are so caught up with themselves being the answer. Sometimes the way to lead is to have someone else deliver the message who has the relationship or has the credibility, right? And so different situations call for different things. So I like to try to think of myself as pretty flexible, mostly because I try to meet people where they are. And so when I have somebody that's a concern or issue, I try to really understand that concern or issue before I attempt to lead or try to solve a problem, because, we have a mutual friend, and he sort of coined the phrase that prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. And it's really nowhere more true than leadership, right? Because I can assume, things about you. And I think a lot of that flows from the fact that in assisted living and memory care, our tour process is generally about an hour and a half talking and then like 15 minutes of the building. So it's a very unusual process because we have to understand, what's going on medically with the client, what's happening, where have they lived recently, what's worked, what hasn't worked. Then we have to understand the person that's usually sitting across the table from us is like a power of attorney. It's often not the client themselves. Are there family dynamics? Where are they at in this process? Or do they want mom or dad to become strong again and become an Olympic weightlifter, right? Even though they're just fresh off a rehab for a broken hip? Or do they want them to be comfortable? Do they want them to have, do they want them to gain weight, lose weight? What is it they're trying to do? And so because of that process, you really have to dive and dig and you have to really find core, I actually think a tour is really simple. You have to find pleasure and you have to find pain. You have to lead them to pleasure and you have to solve their pain, but you can't do that until you sort of probe and really get to the core issue of their problem or how to get them more pleasure, right? Some people move in for lifestyle reasons. Some people move in because they've been falling and they want to stop falling, right? It's a pain thing. So because of that, I think I've spent the last 5 or 6 years of my career really learning how to ask questions and really learning how to ask questions that I think create a choice. My favorite questions are questions that create a fork in the road. And then I can then sort of let people choose a fork. And there's no right or wrong answer, but those choices that they make, they tell me a lot. And then from there, I can continue to sort of hone in. And hopefully by the course of an hour and 15 minutes, sitting across from a family or sitting across from a job interviewee, I can understand their why. I can understand, what it is they're hoping to accomplish. I can because when you're talking to someone that's doing a job interview, or we're talking to a family, they bring baggage, they bring biases to the table. And so a lot of times if we take people at face value, which it's fine to do, and I think it's probably the framing you should start at. But when you start seeing these little things like maybe they have a hang up here and what they're telling me is their filtered version of reality, it's not uncommon to have a spouse that thinks their spouse's care needs are easier than they really are because they have a bias and they have a filter. And it's not uncommon for an interviewee to have a strong opinion of themselves, right? So they come in with sort of this faux confidence when maybe really they're curious and they're not sure if they can do the job. And so I think just because a lot of my interaction with the general public is interviews and is tours with families, it's just caused me to really get to a place where I ask good questions. And I think that's probably the essence of leadership is you have to understand the person, sitting across the table from you. You have to understand their actual problem, and if you can do that, then you can try to help them solve it. Because I think that's really the essence of leadership in a lot of cases.
That is so good, man. And it really brings up a recent experience that I had. We had a group of entrepreneurs on a mastermind call recently, and we had a guest speaker come in and speak to us about leadership, about growing businesses and so forth. And it was so off-putting when he began the conversation by saying, look, guys, I have the answers and you don't. And he didn't exactly say that, but he led into that without understanding any of us on the call. And it was very, very off-putting. And it really resonates with me exactly what you're talking about, because leadership is not a one size fits all approach. It's not a, here's my answer and I know all and you must follow. And if you do, here's the promised land, because we're all different, right? We all have different needs. We all have different desires. And especially in your business, obviously, families, there are different needs, desires, baggage, background, and true goals, right? What is it that you are looking to accomplish? And then crafting that and co-designing that future is what I believe is real leadership. And I think there's a lot of obviously tactics that go along with that in terms of question asking and really listening and deeply actively listening and so forth. But man, that's so insightful. And I really appreciate you sharing that because it really resonates with me. If we were to switch gears just a bit and talk about, sort of whether it's residential assisted living development or just development in general, talk to me a little bit about numbers and so forth. And obviously you talked about, the supply chain and all the challenges that we have going on right now. We have inflation happening left and right. We have labor issues going on left and right. Talk to me a little bit about perhaps some of the numbers. Let's talk about some challenges. Let's talk about some opportunities. What are you seeing in your corner of the world?
Well, in the assisted living world, I'm in a couple different states, and one area has been really hard hit by natural disasters. So I would consider it to be kind of a non-normalized market. When you're the only market that's had 2 hurricanes in the same season in U.S. history, you're going to have a sort of a different thing happening, right? There's businesses that are closed because they're destroyed. There's homes that still haven't been rebuilt. There's, when you have things, you mentioned inflation. Well, you can have inflation, but then you can also have just price increases because supply demand metrics are off, right? And if 10,000 houses need roofs, then roofing materials are going to cost more in that market than they will somewhere else. And so I'm in 2 states. I kind of have my finger on the pulse of the labor market of Southwest Louisiana. I kind of have my finger on the pulse of Dallas, and we'll soon have, there's a outlier city called Denton, which is really it's its own market really, but it's sort of also a larger part of DFW. And so, supply chains are funny right now. It's funny because you have these different critical path items that come up. Like right now, our Denton project is delayed because the piece that goes between our windows, we don't have it. And it's very hard to get. And we've been on order for those for 4 months. So, I think supply chains are interesting now because I think what we probably will all learn from this, and the people that are developing now are going to learn a lot, is we're going to start to ask really good questions about supply chains moving forward. And I think that in America, we often, and some other countries don't have this experience, but in America, we just take for granted that there's always going to be a truck that comes the next day, whether it be with toilet paper, whether it be with hand sanitizer, face masks or window mulling. We just take that for granted. And, I think that we've sort of started to see how fragile things are. So, that's just kind of the inflationary sort of supply chain piece. The thing about assisted living that's very interesting and also very true about apartments, and maybe more true about apartments, is that apartments really do benefit as an inflation hedge quite nicely because their ratio of rents to labor are such that, if you have expense increases and you have rent increases, inflation, then your delta starts to grow. Now, I think people that don't understand money would say, well, they're making more money, but they're really not. They're making more currency, which now buys less of the thing. So they're really an inflation hedge. Assisted living and memory care can be very tricky because it's very labor centric. Labor is a much bigger part of your budget. And so when you have inflation, you have to have enough rent elasticity to be able to raise rents on your residents and their families, because you're now no longer able to deliver care at the same price as you were when labor rates were lower or when you weren't spending money. So I think, from a pure inflation hedge point of view, I think I really like multifamily from that perspective. I think assisted living and memory care sort of benefits in a way that it has to be done, meaning that somebody has to take care of these folks. And so we're going to have to see wholesale, systematic, and structural changes to this industry. And the thing I've been advocating for a long time is we need targeted immigration for healthcare workers. We have a shortage right now of healthcare workers. We're going into whatever stage of the pandemic we're in, and we had a healthcare shortage going into that. Many people have chosen to leave the healthcare profession. So, America could use a million or 2 million, caregivers and nurses right about now. So I read in Texas, we have an 83,000 job nurse imbalance. That's in Texas. So you can just imagine, how different that sort of makes things to be. So as far as the numbers go, I would say that a typical assisted living or memory care deal for us is going to often be something in an internal rate of return rate of around 20%. So they do a little better than some other projects. I wouldn't say that I have a really good handle on that because one of our signature projects was an opportunity zone deal. So it's a 10-year hold time. And so it's possible that, we could change those figures if we sold a little sooner. But ultimately, one of the things we're really excited about, and one of the reasons why I like multifamily is demographics. And if you think that there's going to be this large wave of potential residents for assisted living and memory care who are baby boomers who are aging into the business. So just to roll the clock back a little bit, I think everybody knows what a baby boomer is. They're not currently interfacing with assisted living and memory care. The average age in assisted living in America is about 87. The oldest baby boomer is like 74, 75, or let me do the math, 76 now. Sorry, I've been telling the story too long. So the oldest baby boomer is 76. So they still have almost a decade before they really start to substantially interface with many components of long-term care. And so, we really like the idea of holding on to our assets for a longer period of time. because we foresee compression of capitalization rates. And because we do a unique approach to assisted living and memory care, I actually kind of think our company is going to be more of a target of a merger than an acquisition. Because what I think is going to happen is some of the big players are going to be like, hey, like you're charging more, you're getting better outcomes, you're doing this thing. Like we've looked at your model, your buildings are a little weird. We get that, but we don't really understand what you're doing. And so rather than like try to rebuild it, we're a big company and we're just trying to juice our revenue numbers to our stockholders. So we're just going to acquire you and then keep you on as a manager. I think that's probably pretty likely in my line of work.
Is that your intention?
I think that's what's going to happen. Just because, no one really merges with apartments, right? They just buy your apartments because it's not really about operations as much. I mean, it can be. I don't want to belittle the operational work of apartments, but it's definitely not operationally as intensive. For every bed of assisted living, you're going to have half to 0.75 employees.
Right.
So that means you've got 1,000 beds, you got 500 to 750 employees, right? If you have 1,000 doors, you might have 25 employees in multifamily potentially, sometimes even less. And so it's just the labor intensivity of it. It's just, they're not the same. I think that's probably what's going to happen is that's going to kind of take place. And so I think I am bullish on the idea of holding these things for another 8 to 10 years because we've kind of gone through a cycle in my industry where institutional money came and splashed around and just got annihilated. And I think they're like, wow, the operator is really important. We can't just, treat this like other asset classes. And so there's been a lot of Wall Street institutional money players that have just gotten demolished in my business. And it's because they don't understand that they should be betting on the jockey and ignore the horse because this is an operator business. And so your operator has to bring certain things to the table. And if they don't, then you're going to have problems. And so that's why I think it makes sense for it to be kind of a merger type of world because they probably wouldn't necessarily want to serve my gumbo if I didn't cook it. So that's my guess.
Yeah, no, this is so good. And man, it just illustrates how we could have this conversation for hours and hours, and we might scratch the surface in terms of not only your thoughtfulness, your introspection, and the way that you invest in your own learning and your own leadership style and continue to evolve in that capacity, but in terms of how you're evaluating the environment. I think it's all very, very insightful. And the listeners should really take away that there's always something more to learn. There's always more insight to gain. And there's always a strategy that's playing parallel in terms of your learning, your evolution, in terms of your business as well. So I think it's so good. And before we really transition into our rapid fire section, before we wrap up this conversation, I would be remiss to ask you, if I didn't ask you, if you were to give yourself advice from, a few years back as you were growing your business, and obviously you're continuing to grow your business, but what's the best advice that you would give your younger self in terms of whether it's real estate development or residential assisted living? What's the biggest piece of advice you'd give yourself?
You're either going to love this answer or you're going to hate this answer. Because when I get asked this question, I have the same answer, which is that I wouldn't tell myself anything because anything that I tell myself would alter who I am and it wouldn't make a difference. I think that so much of business is built around shortcuts and hacks and avoiding things, when in reality, the learning happens when you are failing. The learning happens when you push yourself. And so I think when you try to give yourself, maybe the advice I would give myself is just to, continue to struggle because, I've done a lot of things that have been difficult. I faced a lot of setbacks in my journey. And I've when I used to coach people that were taking up assisted living and memory care, I would really try to work with people that I thought had grit, because you have to have grit in business. And I think the type of grit that you have to have in apartments is maybe different. Your grit has to be in like the deal flow acquisition side, because how many deals you have to underwrite, that requires a certain type of person with a certain type of attitude. So, I think people that are successful are the ones that develop grit. And we've been in a period of time now where I think there's a lot of easy money and there's a lot of stuff kind of flying around, but that won't last forever. It can't. And I think the people that sort of develop the ability to, again, they got a plan, they get punched, now you need a new plan. And so I think the people that develop that in these times are going to be the ones that are going to be the ones that succeed, whatever their definition of success is.
I think it's phenomenal. I think there's so much to be learned from what you just said. Continue to struggle. There are no shortcuts, right? And going through that struggle is where the answer is. There's no advice other than that. And I think that is such a valuable thing, and you can continue to expand and evolve through that struggle. And I think it's a great advice that we can all remind ourselves of. But Loe, man, I could go on and on with you for a really, really long time. And so I want to be respectful of your time. I want to transition into our rapid fire section. We call it the Rare Air Questionnaire. It's all about having conversations like this and being uncommon, being introspective, being thoughtful, being dynamic in terms of our personality, in terms of our approach, in terms of how we listen to other people, how we lead people, and leaning into that, man. This is such a great conversation. If you had to point to 2 or 3 of the most impactful books you've read over the past few years, what would those be and why? You talked a lot about learning and reading in this conversation so far.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time just, cursory studying the human brain. And I think there's a lot we don't know about the human brain. So a good book I really enjoy is Brain Rules. It's 12 rules about the brain. Number 1 is exercise, so I'm a little tubby, but I like to exercise and I like my foods. But I do that because it's good for my brain. And obviously being around people with cognitive impairment, I see that day in and day out that, how important exercise can be. I think the second book is Now Discover Your Strengths. It's all about sort of Gallup poll based data in which they figure out why people are successful. And the people that are successful often know their strengths and they focus on their strengths. So much of modern culture is like trying to refine your weaknesses when in fact you should often just leave those be or get those to an acceptable level and really just focus on your strengths. And it basically has the idea that we have neural pathways and some of us just have stronger, faster neural pathways in certain areas. There's a reason why no matter how hard I try, I'll never be a singer. It won't happen. I can't hear a tune the way someone that's a talented singer can be. Take a look at Michael Jordan, right? Great basketball player. There's a lot of running and jumping involved in basketball. There's a lot of running and jumping in baseball. He still wasn't very good in the outfield because his brain wasn't wired for that type of activity. They seem so close, but sometimes subtle differences make a huge difference. And then I would say probably Factfulness. It's written by this guy who's a public health guy. And I think he passed away and his kids published his notes and made it into a book. And it's a great sort of apolitical approach to that we don't have enough facts. And so the book starts off with a series of questions. And it's like, what percentage of girls in Afghanistan do you think graduate high school? And then you fill in the numbers. And we have all these biases and all these misconceptions about the world because we consume media and the media has a narrative, right? And the narrative isn't necessarily positive. Unlike a lot of people, I don't blame the media because I blame us. The media is just giving us the crap that we want. And so people that like rail on the media, well, just turn it off or support media that you don't, because ultimately when we stop consuming crappy media, we'll get better media. When we stop electing crappy politicians, we'll get better politicians. So Factfulness really takes the approach of, it kind of sets the baseline that we're so uneducated about facts that we basically act and make all these decisions in a factless world. And we need to get more, prone to understanding the facts. So I think those are probably the 3 books that I think probably come to mind when asked that question.
Yeah. And I think it was so interesting when it showed that chimpanzees, when answering those questions, were more accurate than human beings or even highly intelligent, regarded scholars and so forth. So I thought that was really, really insightful.
Well, it exposed that our biases are so strong that you can ask a college professor, and maybe not in their discipline, but like in a somewhat related discipline, and they'll bring baggage to the table that makes them less accurate than a chimpanzee. It's not against education. It's basically exposing that we're all, especially now in the world of social media, we all exist in our own curated reality. But that doesn't make the reality factful. And so we have to challenge our own biases all the time to make sure that our lens of looking through the world doesn't make us less accurate than a chimpanzee randomly picking A, B, C, or D.
Loe, that was so good, man. And I loved your reasons why. And I could talk a lot about brain rules as well, but I will leave that for part 2, because I guarantee we're going to have part 2 of this discussion at some point, because man, there's so many different directions we could go with this entire conversation. But aside from what we've already talked about today, Loe, what's the biggest way that you elevate your life on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think helping others. I mean, I don't have the luxury, some people, their ability to develop other people, it's a luxury. For me, it's a necessity. I mean, I have a lot of people that I count on my team that take care of very vulnerable people. And so I think what I try to do is just try to help them be smarter, quicker, stronger. And so I really try to help people around me get better. I try to coach and train and lead when I can. And I always feel most frustrated when I'm, working on some project or in the business and I get away from the root of coaching, training, and leading, which is the most fun part of what I do. Even if it's hard, it's definitely the most fun part, because when I see a person, start at point A and end up at point Z, it's very rewarding for me in a lot of ways.
It's a pattern that I've observed between the most successful people that I've spoken to, is that when I ask them how they elevate themselves, they're really talking about, in many ways, how they're elevating others around them as well. And I think that's so powerful. It's such a great pattern for us all to really observe and delineate further in our own lives. And my last question for you before we wrap today is, what's the biggest way that you elevate others? Is there anything additional that you would add to that?
I think it's probably covered, but I really try to understand what their situation is and what they want. And when I understand that, I can then facilitate helping them get there. I think the thing I try to do is, I've had some situations before where I've had families tour with me, or I've had people apply for a job. And when I understand their why, I'm like, I don't think this is a job you should take. I had a guy that applied for a job, and I asked him the number one reason why. And he told me that he had a daughter that had a rare condition, and he wanted to be close to a hospital that was the world's leading hospital for treating that condition. But that hospital was like 45 minutes away from where he'd applied. And I was like, look, if that's your why, you're going to pass 30 other jobs on the way to this one. So I said, why don't we work on trying to find you the right job? So again, it's not about me. It's not about my companies. It's about, hey, what do you need? And can we help you in some way? So instead of like pitching him on the job and trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, I'm like, let's find you a job close to the hospital. And so that's kind of an example of what I mean when I say figuring out what someone really needs.
Yeah. It's like taking the long way and going through a little struggle, right? It's like you wanted to fill that role, I'm sure, but you also wanted to do the right thing. And in the long run, that pays off and that elevates others. And man, that is a great example. But Loe, what a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Is there any parting thoughts or words of wisdom that you'd like to share with Elevate Nation today?
No, other than if allowable, and you can edit this out if it's not, but in the event that people want to get a hold of me, just head to our website, Goodhorn Capital. You can obviously reach me there if you're interested in employment opportunities in the assisted living memory care space, investment opportunities. I don't coach and train people how to start those businesses anymore, but I can point you in the right direction. So, just reach out and I'll try to be a connector and help you in any way that I can, whether you want a job, whether you want to be a partner in some way, or whether you want to learn about investing, please reach out at goodhorncapital.com.
Absolutely. And that was going to be my next shout out, is we're going to put a link in the show notes as to how you can find Goodhorn Capital, whether it's goodhorncapital.com. And Loe, man, until next time, I really appreciate you taking time. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, and we will see you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Wow. Elevate Nation. That was a phenomenal conversation with the dynamic, the introspective, and I got to tell you, the hilarious Loe Hornbuckle. You may have not caught that in the conversation because he was very subdued in many ways and very introspective and very thoughtful. But I'm telling you, this is a very dynamic individual and someone who I deeply respect and appreciate just the way that he approaches life and business, and his impact and the clarity of his impact in terms of how he helps other people through residential assisted living and development and real estate in general. So such a great guy. And I just want to encourage you to delineate, what are your top takeaways from this episode? What are the top 3 takeaways that you took from this episode? I've got several written down right in front of me. So I want to encourage you to jot those down, make a note of that, and share those with a friend. Share those distinctions, those takeaways with someone that you care about, or someone that you maybe just met, or maybe it's someone that you'd like to get to know further. Hey, I just listened to this podcast and I think that you would appreciate X, Y, and Z. And so really that's what it's all about. Of course, repetition is the mother of all skill. Listen again. Because when you listen again, you learn something new. And when you have a discussion with someone else, that's when you understand that distinctions can come from different directions. Our mind hears certain things, other people's mind hears other things. So I want to encourage you to not only take repetition, but also surround yourself with other people, have a discussion about this episode. And at the end of the day, the most important piece is to take massive action, because that's the best way to learn, is to put things into practice. And until next time, Elevate Nation, I just want to thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Elevate. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and pay it forward by sharing with a friend. Most importantly, take this opportunity to elevate your results by taking immediate action on what you learned. For more, visit elevatepod.com.